Welcome to Indie Film Forum. I'm your host, Kalpana Biswas. I'm delighted to introduce you today to filmmakers Alexis Werner and Kris Veenis, who recently premiered their documentary film, Our Way Home, about post-traumatic stress among war veterans. Producer Alexis Werner is a sophomore at Temple University and founder of Pittsburgh-based nonprofit Seeds of Hope. She has been involved in social justice projects since high school. Her team has created 15 victory gardens nationwide, producing over 3,000 pounds of vegetables for veterans and their families. She joins us from Philadelphia. Kris Veenis, co-director, cinematographer, and editor of the documentary, is a filmmaker, screenwriter, and media arts instructor. He was a producer on the award-winning documentary A Shot to Save the World about Jonas Salk and the discovery of the polio vaccine. He has acted in and produced promotional material for the feature film A New York Heartbeat, starring Eric Roberts. In 2015, Kris and his writing partner, Don Amon, won a Steeltown Indie Filmmaking Grant for their screenplay, Candyland. Welcome, Alexis and Kris. Welcome, Alexis and Kris. I'll get started with Alexis. I've watched your documentary film about PTSD. You started on the film when you were pretty young. You were in high school. What got you started?
Yeah, so my stepdad had returned home from Afghanistan. He was in the U.S. Army, and he came home with really severe post-traumatic stress disorder. And what my coping kind of skills led me to, through the help of a mentor, Greg Dietz, at my high school, was to start a nonprofit called Seeds of Hope. We did victory gardens all across the country through the Fisher House Foundation and local VFWs and Girl Scout troops. And then we decided, well, let's talk about educating the youth. So we created a children's book and read it to over 700 kids, K through 4th grade. And it talked about volunteering, the importance of veteran appreciation, nutrition. And then when I was a junior in high school in 2013, it was finally time to tackle post-traumatic stress. So we decided we were going to do a documentary about post-traumatic stress from World War II until the present day. That's how it got started.
That was very young to get started on a film that's so complex. Kris, when did you come into the picture?
I had previously worked on a documentary project about education inequality through the Youth Media Advocacy Project affiliated with Carleton University. And one of my contacts through there knew Alexis and knew about her and her story and what she was trying to do. Alexis called me one day out of the blue saying that her and Greg, her mentor, had this idea for this documentary, and she started telling me, about her backstory and why she was so passionate about doing this. And I was interested in the project because I remember, growing up, my grandfather fought in World War II. He was a gunner's mate in the Navy, and he fought in the Pacific Theater. And I remember being like a little kid and being at my grandparents' house, when I was like 8 or 9 years old, and wondered why like my grandma and my grandfather didn't sleep in the same room. And then, I would wake up in the middle of the night and I'd hear my grandfather like screaming and like fighting in his sleep. And I would always wonder, like what caused that? And when you would ask my grandfather about his experiences, didn't want to talk about it, it was in the past. But as he got older, he started talking about it a little more. He would tell us, as the gunner's mate, the Japanese pilots, they would fly kamikaze missions and they would try to take out the guns. That would be like their objective, would fly your plane into the guns and blow them up so that that they can't shoot you. And so they would get so close to the guns before they would, shoot the plane down that he could see like the whites of the pilot's eyes. That like affected me, thinking like what my grandfather went through, and he's just like one small example of how many young, men and women in World War II went through an experience like that.
I was attracted to your documentary also because my father was in the Army, and he was in the war, and he came back and he had PTSD. And I think we didn't understand that at that time. Alexis, your film talks about various aspects of the problem, the coming home, the PTSD, the health issues. Even when you were filming, I think it was your father who was hyper vigilant. How did you sort of understand all of that and categorize these different aspects?
At the time, when he had first come home, we didn't understand it at all. My mother and I were seeing my stepfather going through all these changes, but we weren't understanding what it was. We just knew it wasn't the same anymore. And when he was finally diagnosed, it made more sense, and it was easier, I think, for us because we understood what was going to come and where he could get help and what the steps were. Going through the filming process, for me, that was really therapeutic because I was finally seeing people like my stepfather who might have been 90 years old, they might have been in their 30s, but they were all going through or had gone through really similar situations and issues coming home. So that was really important for me, and I think that was really important for the development of the film.
One of the problems that all of us have experienced that is very difficult for war veterans to really talk about their experiences. Now, when you're doing a film, Kris, you have the situation of needing to make veterans talk. What did you have to do that?
Since it's such a sensitive subject and since there is so much stigma, one of the things that took us a long time to figure out is like, who do we identify to interview? And how do we get them to open up? There's still a large stigma about PTSD, especially with the military, because as we were talking to some of these vets and talking to experts, the military has a built-in mindset that they train soldiers to be tough and to be strong and to not admit weakness. And it's hard to like shut that off when you come home and you're a civilian again. You're still in the mentality of, it's not affecting me that much. It's not that bad. If I admit that it's a problem, I'm weak. And so that was a very hard challenge. But what was good was, from my standpoint as a filmmaker, is when I sat down and talked to Greg and Alexis, they had a very clear, maybe not such a clear idea about what the film should end up looking like, but what the types of people that they wanted to profile and like the story that they wanted to get out. And the big thing that I was, glad that they were wanting to do was to make a documentary that showed PTSD is like a multifaceted problem that would affect anybody, no matter your race, your gender, your economic standing. A lot of the documentaries in the past, it's very one-sided in the story that it portrays. It affects white men, and that's not the case. It was a challenge finding people though that weren't white middle-aged men. We found a lot of Vietnam veterans, and we, as we talked to experts and talked to a lot of the Vietnam veterans that we profiled, we found that they're getting to a point now, it's been long enough since they've had their experiences in Vietnam, that they're ready to talk about these things. And World War II veterans as well, but a lot of the problem with World War II veterans is they're at the age now where there is not as many of them left. Vietnam veterans seem to be ready to talk, they're tired and ready to get over like the stigma and all of the problems that stigma has created in their lives. Alexis and Greg had a good initial group of interview subjects, maybe 4 or 5, and they were mostly Vietnam War veterans.
How did you go about finding these people?
A lot of it was word of mouth, just from working on the gardens in the book. We were really well connected with the military population. We were really well connected with the nonprofit sector. But when we were getting to the nitty-gritties of, okay, we're looking to really diversify the film, I was reaching out to hundreds and hundreds of female veterans. And just through, I knew someone who knew someone, and I was writing what we were looking for and anyone who'd be willing to speak. So really, it came from a bunch of different angles.
Let's watch the film, the first clip that you have.
For years now, Audie Murphy has been a well-known motion picture star, but he is known also as the most decorated soldier of World War II. What has stayed in his mind? What does he remember most about that time of his life?
When you heard the war was over, what was your first thought or reaction?
Well, coming home again, I started to think about home for a change, which we didn't dare think of before because, as you know, you live from day to day, minute to minute in most cases. And suddenly I was a little frightened. Although I was very happy the war was over, I suddenly didn't feel that I had a home.
I don't think that civilians understand what it's like to be in the military if they've never served. They definitely don't understand what it's like to be in combat.
When I was going over to Vietnam, I was prepared for the worst. And when I got over there, I saw the worst.
You know, and they think, well, why can't you just get over it? Like, that was 10 years ago, you know, why do you have to keep talking about it? You know, it was something that happened, it's done, let's go, you know, and it doesn't work that way.
In every war, there's gore and violence and graphic things that stick in people's minds forever when they see them. It affects every person who's ever probably been in combat or seen something or been taken away from their comfort and put into some kind of deployment scenario away from their family.
I've seen the effects of the bullet on the individual that took the bullet, and I've also seen the effects of the bullet by the person that pulled the trigger. And neither one of them are pretty. And it's something that they have to live with for the rest of their life, and it's something that I have to live with as well.
When I was at the VA trying to get help for post-traumatic stress, they asked me, what moment do you remember the most of? What affected you the most? And it's hard to pinpoint it because there were so many, and I try to explain to them that there were so many times that I was afraid to lose my life and thought that I wasn't going to make it.
How do you wrap your head around that? You know, how do you pick up and keep moving? And in the military, you're taught to pick up and keep moving. You're taught to compartmentalize that. But at some point, you know, compartmentalizing that has to come forth. You have to address it. It has to be dealt with.
Civilians need to know that just because we didn't come back with a limb blown off doesn't mean that we don't have issues. Mental health issues with the PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, wounds that you can't see with the naked eye.
Alexis, what I found really interesting about this clip was the breadth of the problem that you've tackled. You've talked about people in World War II, you've talked about Vietnam vets, you've talked about people from who went to Afghanistan and Iraq. I was really impressed with the amount of footage that you seem to have collected. A lot of this is archival footage from what I could gather.
With the funding issue that we had, we were running on about $12,000 for the production of a 45-minute to an hour-long documentary going into this. So all of our sources primarily had to be free. So Kris really was the one who was going through online, finding footage that he could have the rights to or to use.
I've worked on some films and the post-production capacity, and especially documentary films where it's been my job to kind of find archival footage, and so I'm fairly well versed in how to find archival footage on a low budget. And a really great resource, and one that I used a lot, is archive.org. It's a database. It has tons of ephemeral video. It has a lot of government video. It has a lot of Army, Navy, Marine Corps video. Towards the end of the filming, I was still missing a lot of stuff because there's only so much that on archive.org that pertained to what we needed. So Alexis got a contact to me through the Army War College that is in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and I spent 2 days there just going through their archives, and they have a massive archive that's over 200 years of military and Army history specifically. And I went there with a camera and a stand, and I took pictures of a lot of them. The last month I was still missing some stuff, and I wanted to add the element in the film that you see a lot to break up the sections. It's a motif of like military memorabilia, and I actually just out of the blue contacted Soldiers and Sailors, since I knew we were going to premiere a film there, and asked if I could meet with the archivist. They have things from the Revolutionary War, they have things up until the most recent events in Iraq and Afghanistan and the Middle East. So that was a place where I was able to find a lot of more modern things. And the Army War College had some more modern things as well, but the thing about them is mostly their stuff is related just to the Army. And archive.org was mostly older films up until like the Vietnam era. The one last place that I looked is there is also a comprehensive military database, and the website is called DVIDS, and it's basically all of the branches of the military, their like audiovisual services.
I'd like to show you another clip.
The saddest and happiest I've ever been have been in the Army, because while you're on a deployment and you see people die and you see kids strewn out in pieces and all this tragedy, there's sadness, deep sadness. But when you're happy and you have your buddies and you watch a movie and you have your jokes and stuff like that, it's the hardest you'll ever laugh because you've endured so much sadness in those quick moments.
I use myself as an example of this. About 5 years ago, I was at a stoplight, parked. A guy rear-ended me. But every time I'm at a stoplight, I look up. And I still feel that feeling. So that was a small example. Now think of that, where every day you're in this hypervigilant mode. Every day you go out, and around every corner there could be someone with a gun trying to kill you. You have roadside bombs. You go to step, you're dead. You know, and think of that just for one day of having to deal with that. But every day, you're pumping your body with these hormones. You know, this fight or flight kicks in, and you know, your body was not designed to stay in that state 24/7.
We've spent a lot of time looking at how the brain functions, and what we believe may be true is we've got this part of the brain called the amygdala that is kind of the feeling center, and certainly it's what regulates, the center that regulates fear. We also have got the prefrontal cortex, the executive decision-making part of our brain. What we believe is true in folks with PTSD is we've got hyperarousal in the amygdala, so it overreacts, and hypo, underreacting of the prefrontal cortex. They don't get their story straight. The shutdown that occurs in survival is significant. It helps with survival.
You just want me to keep going?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That's just like, so whenever it won't be you at this angle the whole time, they'll switch back and forth between them.
This is a good thing for post-traumatic stress, like, because like this is a good example, because I have a hard time paying attention to you when they're moving around. That's like a good way of. Are they filming that? When you were moving behind the camera, it was tough for me to concentrate. I gotta watch all the movements. It's called, what do they call that? Hypervigilance.
Everyone has a story that shapes their path in life, and mine started in June of 2010 when my stepfather got home from Afghanistan. He came home and he was completely different. He was a physically strong man, but you could see that he was deteriorating mentally. And we have a huge family, so after all of the Italian food and all the gifts and all the people stopped coming to the house on a daily basis, I think he had the chance to sit with himself and really think about his time overseas and reflecting how he was going to transition back home.
We always had different missions. You know, missions varied from 1 week to 1 day to 3 weeks to a month, depending on what we needed to do, what we needed to accomplish. And a mission could be 3 hours, or it can be 2 weeks. You know, it just depended. I've been stuck in places for I sat on a mountaintop and didn't move more than 100 feet in any direction for a week. I'll never forget that first time that I was just ambushed, where I was just pinned down and really couldn't do much in the sense of movement. The insides of my knees started to get sore, and I realized that my legs were literally shaking so hard that my knees were cracking, you know. Like every second they were just smacking together, and I was trying to maintain focus, you know, what I was doing, because I was shooting a machine gun. I was shooting an automatic grenade launcher towards the enemy.
And it was so scary to see this transition, because we thought everything would go back to normal and he would come home and get a job, and you know, we'd live in the house and eat dinner on Sunday like everyone else did, and that wasn't the case. And you know, I didn't understand what PTSD was as a 15-year-old girl who does. But after reading about it online and reading about other issues that veterans suffer from, I started to grasp with better understanding, and I found out that I wasn't alone.
Alexis, having watched several documentaries that have been out recently about people in the military, policymakers and higher officials both in the military as well as in government are really interested in knowing a lot more about how veterans are responding to war and then coming back to civilian life. What has been the impact of the film?
I think it was really incredible. So we did our Pittsburgh premiere this past November 2015, and we asked the mayor to come speak, Mayor Peduto, and you know, his people said absolutely. Mayor Peduto has been working on an initiative to end homelessness with the veteran population. They see the value in veterans, and they see the importance in hiring vets, having them a part of the community.
Well, I think that's part of what we want to do with the project now, is to try to build more bridges with organizations, to try to use the documentary as an advocacy tool to show the breadth of this issue. Because I think a lot of times it just gets reduced down to a person who might suffer from PTSD in like one aspect of their PTSD. Maybe they suffer from alcoholism, or maybe they suffer from like violent outbursts, or you know, any number of things. But I think a lot of times they get pigeonholed in like one area or one diagnosis, when it's really like a larger, more broad problem.
Well, here's a final clip.
When I landed at Seattle, I went into the military side, and then when I processed through that, this woman who was, I'm guessing she might have been 40 or 50 years old, said, "Are you just returning from Vietnam?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am," and she spit in my face.
In the military, more so than probably any other occupation, if you will, you depend more upon your buddies and they upon you to save your life. So friendship is a great thing. Well, I had a machine gun squad. I had a 5-man machine gun squad, and but if anyone had asked me what is your best remembrance of World War II, I tell them this: I took 5 boys into combat. I sent 5 men home to their mamas. Didn't get a scratch, although my gunner took a bullet right here, went up the inside of his helmet, around the helmet, down the back, and hit the ground in the back of it. Didn't get a scratch, and he said, "Damn it, I won't even get a Purple Heart." But that's what I'm proud of. We worked together, we lived together, and we came through it all in one piece. No one told us anything about death camps, concentration camps, or any of that stuff. The officers, maybe they knew about it, but as enlisted personnel, they didn't share much with us. So we headed south towards Munich, and one day we noticed this strange smell. And the closer we got, the worse it got. And finally we came upon Dachau. And we came upon these boxed cars filled with dead bodies. Someone had to do it. Someone had to come upon this, whether by plan or however. But it's something you don't never want to see. That's what war is all about. That's what war is all about.
Well, I was in tech school at Wichita Falls, Texas, Shepherd Air Force Base. I was abducted by two men and assaulted for several hours and let go after daybreak. And at that time, you didn't talk about any sexual assaults or anything like that. It would affect your career. Back then, anyone that was considered a problem. So I didn't deal with the issue until 2004.
When did this happen?
1977.
When I first noticed that there was a major problem was trying to just do normal everyday things in society, like trying to drive down the street without having a problem with losing my freedom. I was so nervous about reacting to somebody's comment, like somebody getting upset with me or somebody flipping me off. When I was driving, somebody had flipped me off, and the next thing I know, I'm in a police chase in downtown Pittsburgh that lasted 15, 20 minutes, and I had to basically beg the police for mercy because I had no clue what I was doing. I had lost complete track of what was going on at the time. I was basically running for myself. There was no reason to be doing what I was doing, and I was trying to figure out why I was running, and the next thing I know, there's 15 cops trying to stop me from running away.
For years, the military has taught that to admit a weakness is to accept defeat. That's, no pain, no gain. We don't ask for help. Tough soldiers keep driving on. And when we realize that is not necessarily the case, it's usually the stronger ones, the ones who succeed, are the ones that actually ask for help, or at least have someone that they can talk to about whatever it is that is causing their downward spiral.
Thank you, Alexis and Kris, and thank you for watching Indie Film Forum. I'm Kalpana Biswas. See you again next time. For more information about Alexis Werner, Kris Veenis, and Indie Film Forum, please visit our websites. Coming up.